Most traditions don't disappear overnight. They fade quietly until one day we stop noticing they were ever there. I learned that from a small vintage box in a cupboard at home. I found it during a Diwali break while cleaning with my mother, which is very unlike me. I asked her, "Whose are these?" She smiled, "Mine." I'd spent my entire life with her, and I had never once seen her practice the craft that had everything in that box. Not once in 25 odd years had I seen these threads in her hands. Not a photo, not a passing mention over dinner. It had simply never come up the way some things never come up until someone happens to open the right drawer at the right time. That craft was tatting, a rare handmade lace making technique. She had learned it at 13, and although she had stopped practicing it years ago, she had never really let it go. What surprised me wasn't that my mother knew it, it was that I never knew she did. And if a skill this remarkable could stay hidden inside our own home, I wondered how many others had quietly slipped out of sight too. So I started learning everything I could about it. Most people see tatting and assume it's crochet, but the two are quite different. It's created one knot at a time with a shuttle and thread. Every knot forms a precise sequence. Miss one knot and the entire pattern changes. There isn't an undo button. If a tension is wrong or the knot is misplaced, you often have to undo hours of work to fix a single mistake. Watching my mother was like watching someone solve a puzzle without looking at the pieces. Her hands remembered movements she hadn't touched in years. The rhythm came back before she'd even said a word about it. She wasn't counting under her breath or checking a pattern card. Her fingers simply knew where to go next, the way you don't think about the steps to your own front door. The more I watched, the more I realized it wasn't just lace. It was teaching something: concentration, patience, sequence, and logic. It reminded me of building with Lego. One brick means nothing on its own, but place each one with care and a structure appears. Take one away and the whole thing changes. Tatting works the same way. Every knot depends on the one before it. I later found that science was catching up to something artisans already knew. Studies on fiber arts point to improved attention, fine motor skills, and something called embodied cognition. The idea that our hands don't just follow the movement, they help shape it. Sometimes tradition understands something long before science finds the language to explain it. The women who sat with a shuttle for an hour after dinner weren't doing a cognitive exercise. They were simply making lace. Yet, the exercise happened anyway, quietly as a side effect of patience. They weren't thinking about neuroscience. Science simply gave us a new way to understand what they had experienced all along. They tatted, corrected, repeated, and learned. Without ever intending to, they were exercising the mind while creating something with their hands. That changed the question I was asking. I stopped wondering why tatting had become rare and started wondering why something with this much skill and value had become so hard to see. Beauty isn't enough for a tradition to survive. Neither is skill. People have to encounter it. It has to become part of everyday life again. I thought that was the hard part. It wasn't. When I looked around, tatting had been boxed into one identity: vintage tablecloths, doilies, and handkerchief borders. Beautiful, but disconnected from how most of us live today. The knots weren't the problem, the context was. The craft hadn't lost its value, it has simply lost its place in everyday life. So the question changed again: not how do we preserve tatting? But how do we help it find a way in everyday life? That question led us to experiment. While threads for tatting were available, the color palette often felt limited. We began imagining what tatting could look like in more expressive and contemporary shades. That curiosity led us to natural dyeing and experimenting with colors from marigold flowers, onion skins, and indigo, and eventually to tie-dye techniques that allowed us to create layered, multi-shaded yarns. The process was far from straightforward. Some color combinations clashed, some threads snapped halfway through a knot, undoing hours of work in seconds. We failed often, but every failed attempt taught us something the last one hadn't. Slowly, the colors began to feel less like relics of the past and more like something people would genuinely choose to wear today. What emerged was far more than a new color palette. A rare lace making technique met the centuries old practice of natural dyeing, allowing two handmade traditions to evolve together, yet keeping both of them alike in different ways. It reminded me that innovation doesn't always come from replacing tradition. Sometimes it comes from giving tradition a new way to be seen. We weren't changing the craft, we were changing the way people first encountered it. That led us to another question. If people don't use lace tablecloths anymore, where else could this live? Could it become jewelry, wearable art, part of clothing rather than a decoration on top of it? The shuttle stayed the same, the knot stayed the same, the precision stayed the same, only the canvas changed. That's what innovation often looks like. Not inventing something new, but helping something old belong in the present. As we shared it with more people, I noticed two very different reactions. Older visitors, when coming to our stall, they simply smiled and said, "Wow, my grandmother used to make this." For them, it was legacy. Younger visitors picked it up out of curiosity, wanting to know how it worked. For them, it was discovery. Two pieces of lace, but entirely different meanings. That's when I understood what revival actually means. It isn't bringing the past back exactly as it was. One generation carries the knowledge, the next has to find a reason to value it. Only when both happen does a tradition survive. Now, when I watch my mother pick up a shuttle, I don't just see lace taking shape. I see years of practice returning to her hands. Knowledge that was never written down, yet it survived in the older books. And it makes me wonder how much knowledge is quietly waiting inside our own home. A recipe perfected over generations, a weaving technique, a lullaby never written down, or simply a skill we've lived beside for years waiting to think about. Maybe revival doesn't begin in museums or institutions. Museums can preserve objects, but communities keep tradition alive. Maybe it begins with someone noticing, someone asking a simple, unglamorous question. Can this still belong in the world we live in today? Traditions doesn't survive because they're old. They survive because someone from every generation makes room for them. That's what tatting taught me. Thank you.